Oh, I better turn my heater off. It's a cold day, but that heater's a little loud. Hi, good morning. I'm Anthony Parent of IRSMedic. I am very excited for today's podcast because we're digging into something that intrigues me, bothers me, leaves me hopeful, but also leaves me disappointed. And it's really this whole idea of dual citizenship. And we're going to be talking about that. And I really just want to go over, who I am. I'm Anthony Parent, and I've been a tax attorney for 20 years, and I help out a lot of people around the world. So I have an incredible amount of clients who are dual citizenships, multiple around the world. Very familiar with it. I have them as clients. I like them. They like me. Yet at the same point, I have this problem with dual citizenship. And it's really just this sort of idea that citizenship requires a loyalty and that you can't have two loyalties. That's the contradiction. Like, no, that's not where. So it just sort of bugs me. And that's kind of where I start. That just little thing that's a logical thing that just doesn't make any sense. So last week, I asked John and Keith if this would be a great topic to discuss, sort of go through Afroyim versus Rusk, the Supreme Court decision that allowed, basically, is our law on citizenship and dual citizenships. And it's a 1967 case, and it's really the foundation of basically our immigration policy, along with some of the laws that were passed right around the same time. And so these are critical things to know. So before we get into it, I want to introduce our guests, our very special guest. First one, Keith Redmond. Keith Redmond, a very handsome man, by the way. He is joining us today. Keith has been a friend of mine for, I don't know how long, over 10 years. I first reached out to Keith when we were trying to repeal FATCA back in 2016, I think is when we first had him on the channel. And so he was explaining it, and then he was the one who really part of the whole group who got that repeal FATCA hearing in front of Congress. I produced a video for that congressional testimony, and it was a really helpful thing, and it really brought together a lot of people who maybe wouldn't be politically aligned to the same thing, and I think that's a beautiful thing. So, Keith, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Our resident expert on international taxation. Keith, how many dual citizens do you think you have in your Facebook group?
I mean, good question. I think a lot. I mean, a lot for various reasons. I mean, the people with whom I speak around the world, I'd have to say, if I had to venture a guess, I'd say probably about 80% are dual
Yeah.
citizens, and sometimes triple citizens, have three citizenships
Yes.
or more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so this is a weird thing for me. This is a weird thing because my clients'
Well,
audience are all people who
yeah.
are dual
And it is,
citizens.
and
And
it
I'm
is
like,
a weird.
oh, it's a really good
Yeah,
thing.
and no disrespect, but it's a weird thing for Americans to put homeland Americans to put their head around. It really is.
I
That how
think,
can you be?
and I think there's reason, and I think there's some pretty good reasons why. And yeah, by the way, Keith's Facebook group is right here, American Expatriates, and it's a lot of dual citizens. Again, people around the world with, and I would say, Keith, what percentage of the people are married to non-Americans?
Oh,
Uh,
I mean, quite a bit. I mean, I mean, a lot of people. They're either married to Americans or they're going to get married. I'm sorry, married to non-Americans or going to be married to non-Americans, or they have children who are American or not American. So it really runs the gambit. It really does.
and
Everybody's
that's
situation's a bit different.
and so who do you and so people call you all the time, looking for help. So
Yeah,
what
I
do you say
mean,
you do?
well, I mean, they contact me in through various channels, and they're just looking to get some sound, pragmatic, practical guidance. That's not, in no disrespect, but that's not just the U.S. compliance industry saying comply. So what
Yeah.
I do is I review their particular situation. We talk about it, and we put together a long-term and short-term strategy on what their reality on the ground options are, whether that be to continue in the system, to not, to stay away, to renounce, to not renounce, etc. And there's no cookie cutter answer because it all
Mm.
depends on the individual's particular profile and circumstances. And then I refer them, to be honest with you, very blunt. I mean, I refer them either to you or to John based on their particular situation if they need to talk to one of you guys, because I have confidence in you guys. And sometimes it ends with me, and that's okay. Sometimes they come back to me after they go and talk to their parents about inheritance issues. and so forth. So I just give practical guidance. And because I'm not in the U.S. tax compliance industry, I have a little bit more freedom to really outline what the real options are on the ground.
There you go. Yeah, and Keith,
Without the
thank you so much for
scaremongering.
that.
Without the
Yeah,
scaremongering.
thanks for that. And yeah, people, if you want to reach out to Keith, well, here's his email: US_overseas_advocate@outlook.com. And really, a lot of the things Keith has been sending over the reason why I would say, Keith, this seems to be what's happening
Yeah.
now. Is that look, the whole streamlined disclosure program has been going on for a while. People have been aware of it. And people have kind of been sort of like, I don't know if I really need to get into it. But now it's the whole estate planning questions and people getting inheritances and worrying about their plans. And that's a lot of the reasons why people are reaching out to you.
Yeah, and sometimes people come to me because they've done something that it was not really appropriate, so enter a reactive mode. But sometimes they come to me on a proactive mode, which is wonderful. And the last point, I just need to do a shout out to a gentleman by the name of John Friedenberger. He is a guy I've known for many years. He was a U.S. tax compliance professional, an American based in Paris for 40 plus years. He passed away last week unexpectedly, and he was a big advocate. I mean, not as big, outwardly, but he really supported residency-based taxation and really understood the damage that it was causing, citizenship-based taxation. So I just want to put a shout out to him that he's going to be very well missed.
Well, thank you, Keith. Thanks for that. Yeah, there's a lot of good ones out there, and that's, I think, one of the problems people have is finding an advisor who isn't just gonna just go with what the government wants you to do, because what the government wants you to do is sometimes not the right thing, and that's for sure. And you need some actual independent thought. So now I'm going to thank you very much. And so we're going to get now, Keith, you don't know too much about what we're talking about, right? You're not familiar with the law.
In all honesty, I'm just, as I said to the people in my group, I'm just getting back in the saddle again after taking a little time off, losing both my parents, and just kind of needed to just be. So I did not have a chance to review.
Okay, great. Well, you're going to be our fish out of water. So when John and I are going off a deep end and losing you, you're going to just say, hey, guys, you're losing me here. So that's fantastic that you have. Great to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us. And now I'll go over to the great John Richardson. And I saw it already. I know my answer I know the answer is yes. Do we have our 32-ounce McDonald Land coffee? We are fired up for this. This is going to be an incredible podcast. I am really excited about it. John sent over slides, kept on sending over slides and revisions. So we have version 4, and that's who we're going to start off with. But I want to get a great introduction to really the intellectual backbone of this movement. That is really what we have here. John Richardson is not someone who's intimidated by large code. He actually reads it. He actually reads what's there, and you'll be surprised. It's often very surprising what the law actually says. And I want to welcome the great John Richardson to us. Good morning to you, John. How's everything in Toronto?
All good, all good.
All right. So, and by the way, John is an incredible attorney. He goes deeper. And, I would just say this: if you got a tricky renunciation, you might want to reach out to John Richardson. If you have a big, tricky issue, John really goes deeper than.
Don't forget, also with green card holders.
Yes, right.
Green cards.
And, I think the thing is when, what Keith was saying is there is no cookie cutter solutions, and there really isn't. And where I find that we get a better result myself is that we ask a little bit more questions of the client. We get the whole answer. And I know John is so thorough on everything, and he knows every little point in his head about what he needs to, wrap up and get there. So thanks so much, John. Thanks for joining us. So you ready for your presentation here? I'll get it up on the stage. Let's get rocking. All right, here we go. Those are my. I just teased my my notes, which we'll get to at the end. But good morning to everyone, and I want to thank our audience for joining us today. We really do have really an incredible audience and interaction. I will get going a little bit before I get the comments, so we'll get to those at the end. I want to just get some momentum going into this as we get to this. And so, all right, well, good thing here. So Afroyim versus Rusk led to the expansion of dual citizenship. And that's the thing that I don't like right there, because you're right. So it does, I'm not comfortable with that. But John, so good morning, and let's get into it, right? So you ready to go? And you're just going to tell me when to go next.
Yeah, let's get through this fairly quickly. Anyway, so this is the topic, right? Before this case of Afroyim, which was 1967, it was awfully easy to lose U.S. citizenship, right? You did any of a number of things. In fact, this actually started with this Mr. Afroyim, Beis Afroyim, while he was not a citizen of Israel, right? While he was not a citizen of Israel, voting in an Israeli election, and the U.S. government wanted to expatriate him because he voted in a foreign election. Okay, I mean, this is really, at least by today's standards, completely over the top. But anyway.
I don't know. I don't think it's over the top. I actually don't. I mean, I know that compared to the modern day, yeah, it's over the top. But from an overall historical idea, there's actually reasons for it. But we'll get into that.
Into what citizenship even is. But okay, yeah. So let's.
Right, and I think that's the point, right? Yeah. Okay, so let's. All right.
The whole history of the United States, we've talked about how we can analyze it in terms of the tax code, but we could also analyze huge chunks of American history through the weaponization of citizenship, specifically citizenship stripping, giving citizenship, etc. There's this fantastic book by Professor Amanda Frost, You Are Not American, that really details this in a very readable way. I'd recommend it to anybody and everybody. But in any case, next.
That actually does. I'm looking at that right now, John. I'm looking at the summary, and actually that does sound like there's a lot of that I would agree with.
Of course, the 14th Amendment, right? The reason or a primary reason, probably overwhelming, okay, for everybody born in the United States, a U.S. citizen, was to make sure that former slaves got citizenship, right? This is really tied into the history of America. But anyway, next.
That's absolutely right, John. That is absolutely right. It is so. So here it is. You Are Not American. Citizenship.
I want to give a shout out. I don't know Professor Frost, but I think it's a fantastic book. So I want to give a shout out to the book if you find this presentation at all interesting.
Yeah, right on. That is all right. Excellent. Okay.
So, so we can think then and now, right? So Professor Frost writes, it's a historical account of the then, okay? A lot of citizenship problems, citizenship stripping, but, what's going on now? Look at this. Executive order on birthright citizenship. This is all back in the news. This is highly political stuff. I mean, my only point is, leaving aside your position on this, citizenship matters. It's back in the news. Okay, next.
I would say so. Yeah, I just gotta write I gotta make some notes here. All right, great. All right, so that is absolutely what's going on. And I think the 14th Amendment was, and I just would say this, the 14th Amendment, I think, is one thing to consider, that it is a statute. So that's what Amendment. What's that?
The 14th Amendment to the Constitution is a statute?
Yeah, I would classify that as a statute.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all. And I think that's important. So,
yeah. I want to get to the bottom line, what this case really is about, because I read it. I hadn't read it for many, many years. I read it again over the weekend. And, I actually saw it very, very differently than I did. First of all, by the way, these are 5-4 decisions. Okay.
Yeah.
5, all of, and we'll get into this in a minute, meaning this could easily be reversed. Okay.
Right.
So, I wouldn't get too comfortable. I mean, that just shows you how contentious this stuff has been. But here's what the teaching of Afroyim actually is. And it's a lot narrower than I think people think. All it is the U.S. government cannot strip people of their citizenship. Citizenship belongs to the individual, and the only way to expatriate is by voluntarily relinquishing it with the intention to relinquish it. So again, that's all Afroyim is. Government cannot take your citizenship. Okay? Now notice that although that had the effect of a lot of people not losing citizenship who might have in earlier years, there's nothing in the case that specifically talks about dual citizenship, right? It's very narrow. In the case of Afroyim, could the U.S. government strip Afroyim of his citizenship for voting in a foreign election? That was the issue. Okay. Next. Now, I think, we've been over this in other podcasts, but what would be examples of expatriating acts, meaning things that if performed voluntarily with the intention to relinquish U.S. citizenship? Well, the two most common, I think, for our, listeners, so to speak, right, would be naturalizing as a citizen of another country or renunciation of U.S. citizenship, right? I mean, if you're going through the renunciation process, look at BS 4079, you'll notice, okay, emphasis on whether it's voluntary and with intention, but we all know that anyway.
Hey, John, I'm curious about just one point. Is serving in your other country's citizenship military an expatriating act?
Depends on the circumstances, not presumptively, but it could be depending.
Okay.
If you're on the front line killing American citizens, probably, yeah.
Probably. Okay.
If it's just basic training, especially if it's not a country that's generally hostile to the United States.
Yeah.
Then it wouldn't be considered. Okay. All right.
Okay. Next.
Okay.
Now, I think I want to frame a question here, okay, because I don't think people understand why this is so important, and it is incredibly important. Today's November 5th, 2025, right? That's the date. So November 5th, 2024, I remember talking to Keith, actually. I was on an overnight flight, and I landed in the UK to the news that apparently the Republicans had won the House, the Senate, and the presidency. Okay.
And we also control the Supreme Court, I would also say.
Yeah, that too. Now, leaving aside your view of whether that's good or bad, let's say there's no constitutional protection on citizenship. Could a Republican-controlled Congress pass a law to strip every Democrat member in Congress of their U.S. citizenship? Could they do that?
Well, I would say the government kind of has in the past, and we'll get to some of the historical statutes that they've passed to interfere with our lives.
In the past, they have weaponized it, but just to give a sense of what an important issue this really is. Okay.
Yeah.
Citizenship stripping. I mean, I don't think you answer at least I hope you would not answer the question is, I hate the Democrats, so yes. There's more fun.
Well, I hate them both equally. I mean, they're both both Republicans and Democrats are firmly against the American people, so I treat them both with contempt. But I could easily see that, and I think if we look historically, especially around our friend Abraham Lincoln, we will see the real weaponization of citizenship, and that's really where it starts. The real weaponization of U.S. citizenship starts with Abraham Lincoln, and that has been going on since then. And I think that's really the historical part of this. And so there's no question. Could a Republican majority in Congress pass a law stripping Democratic members of U.S. citizenship? Yeah, of course they could. They kind of have in the past. So yeah, because there is no meaningful protection. And I think that's the issue that we have, that the protections we have for citizenship have been slowly eroded away to where it's not really and that's the thing. It doesn't matter anymore because no one even thinks that dual citizenship's a problem.
Let's see if it does or if it doesn't. Let's go to the next slide.
Okay.
Now, this whole discussion that we're talking about today is really rooted in the 14th Amendment, which is far longer than what I've got up here. But what it says is, or what it includes, all persons born or naturalized in the United States. I don't want to get into the jurisdiction discussion for the moment, but are citizens of the United States. Right now, whether you think whatever you think the effect of the words subject to the jurisdiction mean, clearly the predicate for this is born or naturalized in the United States, right? Okay. So what has been recognized in Afroyim and subsequent cases is that when you talk about citizenship there is a constitutional aspect to this, which really is to protect individual Americans from the government stripping them of their citizenship, right? Which they've been doing for years.
I see something else going on here.
Okay. So continuing on. So that's the backdrop.
Well, this is what I would say right here. Here's the number one problem with the 14th Amendment when you look at it. 14th Amendment, again, is what I would say is a statute. It was repassed. It's a law that defines the highest law of the land, but it was a statute. Does this 14th Amendment conflict with our common law rights, which all constitutions are sworn to protect? And yeah, I would say so, because look at what it does. It says the federal government is saying not only if you're born and naturalized in the United States, you're a citizen of the United States, but you're also a citizen of the state which you reside in. That is, the federal government is claiming, because before this, remember, people used to be citizens of their state, but now the whole purpose of the Civil War was to create a super government, super state, that no longer is the federal government a collection of the states where it gets its power from. It's a mightier thing that can direct what its states do. They're now subservient. And so the 14th Amendment puts the states in a subservient position. That is, the federal government grants all its powers to the federal government, but what the federal government does is like, well, actually, we're bigger than you. And that's what the Civil War decided, that the federal government is more powerful than the states of where it derives its power from. So that's the problem I have with this, is we have federal law defining state law. And when the federal government was never granted that power. So that's why I say the 14th Amendment is actually statutory interference with our common law rights, because it makes us citizens of the United States, no longer citizens of our state. We're no longer there. And now this, if you think about this, here's the problem that you have with doing this, is that, okay, how does the federal government gets its power? It gets it from the states. How does the state get its power? It gets it from its citizens. So now, and this is the problem we have, the federal government gets to dictate who's a citizen of the states. And so the problem that people have is the federal government's allowing all these people to come in because, hey, we don't like our constituency. They're not voting the right way. We need to import new people who are going to vote our way. That's a real problem. And that is what's going on. And the 14th Amendment is the thing that allows it to happen. The 14th Amendment takes power away from the people, gives it to the federal government to decide who gets to live in their own state, which is not the original understanding. So that's kind of where I would say I kind of like, I know people look at the 14th Amendment as a good thing, but when you actually look at it structurally, it perverts things. And it puts the federal government ahead of the states, which inherently puts it ahead of the people. So that was my little diatribe on that. Back to you, John.
Right. Well, you sound a little bit like Ronald Reagan in his inaugural speech in 1981, where he makes the point that, hey, let's never forget, okay, that it's the states that created the federal government or something.
Right.
Yeah. You would have been a Reagan supporter, absolutely.
He was, Reagan talked a lot, right? But his results really weren't helpful. There was one, I don't even know if there's one thing he did. And I mean, come on, the whole Iran-Contra thing. I mean, look, the CIA was the number one drug dealer on his watch, and I don't think it stopped either. So, Reagan was a perfect actor to make it look like he was on our side. He did nothing. So, I mean, he really wasn't.
He was an actor. That was his profession.
He's a great actor, by the way.
All right. The starting point in this, it really doesn't start with Afroyim. I mean, all of this stuff, there's a whole history. Yeah. The starting point in this, which I thought I remembered and reinforced, I guess, last night, anybody who's actually interested in this needs to go back and read the case of Perez and Brownwell, 1958, but specifically, you've got to read Justice Warren's minority opinion, which is by far the most sort of lucid exposition of the meaning of citizenship and, all of this. I mean, he gets into citizenship as the right to have rights, etc. Now, in Perez and Brownwell, it's the same issue, whether the government could strip people of citizenship for voting in a foreign election. In 1958, it was a 5-4 decision ruling okay, that yes, Congress could strip people of their citizenship, with Justice Warren writing for the four-judge minority, and there were a couple other opinions. But I really think the starting point in understanding this is reading the minority decision in Perez-Brownwell, specifically Justice Warren, and it's incredible because basically 9 years later, Justice Warren's minority decision becomes the majority decision in Afroyim. Next slide. Next slide.
Yep.
Overrules Perez. Basically, it's written by Justice Black, but he really summarizes the Warren dissent in Perez and Brownwell. And I want to actually read this, and I want everybody please to listen. This is so powerful. It's so important. Close your eyes. I'll read it, everybody. It says a lot. In fact, no case since, all right, has really said the same thing. Citizenship in this nation is part of a cooperative affair. Its citizenry is the country, and the country is its citizenry. The very nature of our free government makes it completely incongruous to have a rule of law under which a group of citizens temporarily in office can deprive another group of citizens of their citizenship. We hold that the 14th Amendment was designed to and does protect every citizen of this nation against a congressional forcible destruction of his citizenship, whatever his creed, color, or race. Our holding does no more than to give this citizen that which is his own, a constitutional right to remain a citizen in a free country, unless he voluntarily relinquishes that citizenship. Perez versus Brownwell is overruled. Now, this is really something, okay, for so many reasons, which, you know, we could do, you could do a full semester law school on course on this, I think. But I want you to notice that it is, by the way, although I didn't include that in the excerpt, it's linked to the
I'm going to put a link. I'll put a link to the decision in the super chat for people. I got it. So yeah. So here you go. If you want to take a look at it.
Something else. Okay. So what this does protects every citizen against a forcible congressional, against a congressional forcible destruction of his citizenship. How many Americans abroad feel they're forced to renounce to survive?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh,
in other words,
right? Yep.
What this actually does is provides the legal predicate, if you will, for an attack on citizenship taxation in terms of the content of citizenship taxation, as opposed to whether citizenship taxation should be allowed at all. But anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about today. Next.
So, and this is where I'm seeing the whole discussion go, and the problem with it. Because the 14th Amendment is not where we get our rights from at all. The debate's over the 14th Amendment. No, our debate is over fundamental rights, not the 14th Amendment. So, and again, what I said at the beginning is the 14th Amendment is a statute. It really is. I know it's incorporated as part of our Constitution, but it is a statute, and statutes come secondary to common law rights. You can't actually pass a statute that violates common law rights. That is called unconstitutional. I mean, it happens all the time. It's basically what our law is. But in theory, and I see what's happening is everyone's focusing on that 14th Amendment and looking for the penumbra of the 14th Amendment to define citizenship. But the 14th Amendment itself is a statute. And when you start going into your statutory interpretations, this is where things have gone off the rail. And we're focusing, and this is where I'm developing my opinion right now, but it seems as if we're going off the rail because we're not going to the fundamental law. We're treating a statute as if it is fundamental law. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the 14th Amendment was not ratified by the South. I think they were frustrated out of it. So the legality of the 14th Amendment is even, I would wonder, I wonder about it because of the way it was passed. It really was a political statute passed, and they had the political power to make it an amendment Just like, and if we have the political power to make amendments, we would. Well, they did because the South was destroyed. So I think that's something to understand is like we are looking at I think that this debate where we're going off the wrong rails is we're looking at the 14th Amendment, not the common law, which would overrule and is more important than the 14th Amendment. Can't be violated even if we wanted to. So that is where I would say, and that this seems to kind of lean on that because we're seeing the Supreme Court. And again, why would the Supreme Court make a 14th Amendment agreement? Because it gives more power to the government. Because now it's a positivist thing. Well, the 14th Amendment says this. Okay, it's more powerful. So I would say this. The Supreme Court has every incentive to make the argument about the 14th Amendment because it makes the argument central to whatever Congress passed or whatever the ratified is, not look to our fundamental rights. Because when we look to our fundamental rights, we're seeing a bunch of problems. All right, another diatribe. All right, Joe.
Well, I think that's a separate. I think it's a separate argument. It is, yeah, it's definitely a separate argument that it's worth developing. Okay. That said, what's important here is this is the Supreme Court of the United States laying down whether Congress can strip people of their citizenship. So we have, regardless of what you think about the 14th Amendment, this is what the Supreme Court is saying. And what you're saying, Anthony, is there may be other reasons for the same result, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, there may be other reasons. Okay. Next. Now here's, you've gone into your sort of theoretical discussion of this. I want to add something here. It's not totally necessary, but I think it's important. So we look at what's happening here, and a lot of the discussion on expatriation has to do with, lack of allegiance or disloyalty and stuff like that. And I want to remind everybody that Perez took place in the context and Afroyim and voting in foreign elections. Afroyim, who was the subject of the case, was not a citizen of Israel. He was just voting there because he was allowed to vote as a resident, etc. And it's pretty clear to me that the Supreme Court easily could have said, you know what, okay, in this particular case, if you're not a citizen, voting in a foreign election is not evidence of disloyalty, so the government can't expatriate you. In other words,
I agree.
Very, very narrowly. But the fact that they didn't, I think, is extraordinary, right? Usually courts don't decide more than they need to, okay?
John, that's a really good point because I think that you're exactly right because you could just say, like, look, you're not voting you're not a citizen voting in a foreign election. You're voting for an advisory panel somewhere around the world. That is a very easy way to make a distinction. We're voting for who we want to be president of our club. You could have said it like that. You didn't need to go all the way to the 14th Amendment. They could have said that. What are you talking about? I think if he was a citizen of Israel and voted, like, okay, yeah, hey man, you there might be an argument there.
I want to stop you right there because actually now, I listened to I actually do find this particular area of law interesting, just for the record, okay? But therefore, and this is the only reason, I actually listened to a transcript of the oral argument. And what was going on was that the government was trying to... Yeah, I'll send it over to you.
You are something else.
It's just online. Anybody, the only question is what kind of person would invest an hour actually listening to it, okay? But anyway... I did. No, I'll send it over to you. And it was absolutely fascinating. I'll tell you why. So Afroyim apparently voted 3 times. So basically, Israel's created in 1948. He goes there as a resident and votes. And then under Israeli nationality, under the law of return, he became a citizen of Israel and then voted in 2 more elections as a citizen of Israel to get to what you were talking about. But this particular case, he was being stripped of his citizenship based on the first one where he wasn't a citizen. Now, here's where I'm going with this. And this is why it's interesting to listen to these oral arguments. Charles Gordon.
Get off my tail.
One of the heavyweights.
Sorry, gentlemen.
In U.S. immigration nationality law, argued the case for the federal government. And what he was trying to do the whole time was get in to the argument, the fact that Afroyim had voted in the foreign election at times when he was a citizen too, even though, that wasn't the issue in the case. He kept trying to get it in, and a good part of the dialogue between Mr. Gordon and the justices is, why are you talking about this? Okay, this isn't part of what was stipulated. This isn't part of the case. And his response is, well, we just thought you'd like to know this, right? So in other words, what Mr. Gordon seemed to me to be doing was to find a way to broaden the issue in the Supreme Court beyond, this voting in a foreign election when he wasn't a citizen, all right, to what was really going on. And he was not successful. Particularly Justice Fortas was, at the end, I think, bearing down on him pretty hard and saying, stop it. Okay, now this isn't what's in the transcript, etc. But what's interesting to me is that the decision of the court, I think, actually incorporated that and said enough is enough. Okay, we are going to deal with this, even though it was not the issue that was framed in the Afroyim case. And I think that that is the reason why this case came down the way it did. In other words, had Mr. Gordon not tried to have gotten this stuff in, I think the Supreme Court might very well have just said, look, this guy's not a citizen, get this out of here. But they didn't.
Look. This is what it would be, John. Well, John, I'm going to take a different approach, and I really appreciate you listening to this because that is incredible information. Let's consider some cases. There's lots of Supreme Court cases that come out, and you find out, well, the facts behind them aren't really organic. They're really not organic cases, but rather they seem a little contrived in order to create some controversy that the Supreme Court could issue on. One of them is a big one, Roe versus Wade. That is a case where the plaintiff herself, Roe, said she was manipulated into being the plaintiff, that she didn't want to do that. And this whole backwards, and there's a collusion between the Supreme Court and the advocates for abortion to create this issue, and that's how they have it. Now, we don't need to go to 1973. We can actually go back, and this is one case that I think is like, this is bullshit. This is total bullshit. And that case would be Marbury versus Madison. That case right there looked a little suspicious to me. That I don't believe that looks like a contrived case so that Justice Marshall could tee off on an issue. It makes no sense. And so this is the point I have. John, you mentioned this is a 5-4 decision, right? So one judge is deciding, one unelected person is deciding all of U.S. law. That's a problem. That's a problem.
Yeah, Anthony, move down a few slides since you raised the question of creating the right kind of plaintiff. Move down a few slides where I talk about the lawyers who argued this. Just keep going down, and then we'll move back up. Keep going. All right, stop. Now, this is absolutely fascinating. Okay, who the cast of characters.
Oh, here we go. There it is.
This is a case that got almost no notice. Another thing that was interesting was I wanted to see how this was treated in constitutional law. This is the 1985 standard constitutional law text, 1985, okay, written by the late Professor Gunther. No mention of Afroyim. Okay, no mention that I can see anyway, very little. So in other words, this was not a case that was regarded as being all that important, I think, in the world of constitutional law. But here we have, this was clearly, we're going to find the right plaintiff because we want this case litigated.
Exactly.
Here's the person who wrote the brief, Nanette Dembitz. All right, she was amazing legal career, basically ended up being a judge, which is why she didn't argue the case. Second cousin of Supreme Court Justice Brandt. I mean, this is like, legal royalty, okay? Then the guy who argued the case Edward Ennis was basically the general counsel for the ACLU and former counsel for the immigration. I mean, like it doesn't get better. So we have on the one side arguing for a 4M. Now go to the next slide.
Oh my God.
Okay, now guess who wrote the brief for the government before he was appointed to the Supreme Court? Thurgood Marshall.
Mm-hmm. Now I see it. John, thank you so much.
And the lawyer who argued the case, Charles Gordon, okay, of immigration nationality law fame, general counsel for the immigration, naturalization service. I mean, this was clearly this was clearly a manufactured case. You think that this poor destitute Afroyim, gets the idea that challenge this or has the resources? Not a chance. Okay, not a chance. So anyway, and by the way, there's links on there to the New York Times articles of all of these people's obituaries. I mean, they were regarded as that important.
Well, and again, when we talk about manufactured, well, I mean, this is a manufactured case.
Oh yeah, of course it is.
And I mean, so there it is. So that's my first problem with this. This is a manufactured case, and it's special people getting their case heard to go for everyone else. And some things I would say, people have Thurgood Marshall isn't necessarily a good guy. He contrived a lot of things. Brown versus Board of Education was one of the most contrived cases imaginable. And, and his, oh my God, was out of control. And let us not forget, they do a lot of things to create the plaintiffs that don't line up with reality whatsoever.
But let's move up back and talk about the case.
Okay, but thank you, John, for that. Thank you. Because I think so I think one thing to say.
Next. Okay, we'll start there. Okay, so again, I've already been over this. Okay, actually, go up a little further. Where are we in this? Higher. Okay, yeah. All right, so there we are. So very quickly, really, this is about the vindication of Justice Warren's dissent in Perez-Brownwell. Next slide. Okay, where basically his theory is adopted 5-4. Imagine this: they overruled a case from 9 years earlier, and this is per Justice Black, and I read that. Next.
Imagine that.
I made the point, okay, that they didn't have to do this, right? We've already talked about that. Next.
They didn't have to do it, but they sure did.
All right, then we get to the next point is, so you have, where's the burden of proof and stuff like that. So in 1980, we have the third case that sort of cements all this, Vance and Teresis. And this has to do with the evidentiary standard for what's required to prove intention and things like that. Just move on. I don't want to talk about that today, but note that that's part of the trilogy. Now let's talk about the effects of this. Now, this has been monumental, okay, because what all the case is, and I'm not minimizing it, but what the case is, it's just that you can't lose, the government can't take your citizenship. It has nothing to do with whether you're a dual citizen or anything. Although, in effect, right, if the government can't take your citizen and you're a citizen of another country, it obviously increases the number of dual citizens, which of course, has dramatically increased the size of the U.S. tax and even more importantly, penalty base. Okay, next. Now I want to talk about, I know, the issue here is sort of the philosophical issue of dual citizenship. I think that reasonable people can argue this in different ways, but a couple of points that I want to make here is that, okay, let me back up. I actually am inclined to think, right, that in Justice Warren's dissent in Perez, he talks about citizenship being the prerequisite to have rights at all, right? If you're not a citizen, you can't have rights. So, on a certain level, okay, I think it's possible to read Afroyim as the seminal case in American human rights law, in the sense that it recognizes that that Americans do have rights. But that aside, that's the sort of more I'm not an academic, but more sort of intellectual side of me. Practically speaking, and there's no doubt about this, is that without dual citizenship, you have very little protection, okay, from the government that you're a citizen of. So dual citizenship does promote freedom of the individual. And, the very purpose of government is in general to restrict freedom of the individual. But anyway, single citizenship people have fewer freedoms. They have fewer places to go. And I don't think citizenship has anything to do. This is my personal view. So who cares about that? But, my personal view is that I don't think citizenship has anything to do with allegiance or loyalty anymore. But anyway, whatever. Next.
Yes, I agree with you, John. I think you're right. It hasn't. People don't even think of it. It's just, hey, where are my privileges?
Right, so let's see where we go from there. Well, that's somehow Mark Twain came to mind. Always important to have Mark Twain in the discussion about.
I think that adds some gravitas there. You have the great Mark Twain. Loyalty to country always, loyalty to government, and when it deserves it, which is never. Honestly, this government deserves nothing. It is.
No, I think that's true. Yeah, I think that's true. All right, next.
Yeah, this government is our worst enemy. There's no question. I mean, there's no question.
No doubt about it, Anthony.
Enemy to every American is the government.
Okay. Well, I've already talked about the lawyers.
Okay.
Next. Okay. Now, epilogue here. Now, this is interesting because, Charles Gordon. I mean, anybody who's interested in this really should listen to the oral argument. I mean, this is unbelievable, the extent to which he tried to reframe this thing as naturalization as opposed to voting. But he's the author of, all this great stuff. And here in his book, here's part of his excerpt about Afroyim a few years later. The Afroyim case overruled Perez and struck down the statute which expatriated a student who voted in a foreign political election. Justice Majority was couched in absolute terms and declared the United States citizen could not be lost unless the citizen volunteered. That's all he says about it, which I think is kind of interesting. All right, given that he was the lawyer who argued the case. But anyway, next epilogue 2.
What I got to say here, and because this is what's bugging me. So as here's a lesson as a trial attorney. What's your job? It's actually not to win and get an acquittal. What your number one job is as a trial attorney is to create a record. Create a record because, look, the trial court could make an error. So that when you go to appeal, you need to have this record. Now, John, I'm going to rely on you. I haven't listened to Mr. Gordon, but he's trying to get all these other things into the record, it seems like, but they weren't in the record. So, what I would assume is at the trial court level, somebody was working with the opposition to make sure.
No, not at all, Anthony. It was based on stipulated facts, okay? And
who stipulated those facts?
Well, they were agreed facts, and the case had to do only with his voting in the first election when he was not a citizen. And in fact, there's an interesting exchange in the Supreme Court between Mr. Ennis and the judges on that point. But anyway, so next on the epilogue.
But if that was true, then the government should have been able to say, oh, by the way, they ruled on that because you weren't a citizen, but now you are a citizen. And you did vote. But so the Supreme Court, it seems like the Supreme Court intentionally never heard the full argument. It wasn't on the record. That, oh, by the way, not only that, you only took a snapshot of this one little thing. Like, well, even that on alone, I don't say that's an expatriation act. Like, that's not enough.
Okay. What the court did was it reminded Mr. Gordon that the issue had to do with whether the voting in 1951 resulted in expatriation. That was the issue.
And that's a weird issue. I got to say that's a losing issue.
Well,
your issue selection already, like, you're going to lose.
Well, remember that this is 1967, okay? The world was a little bit different then. But anyway.
Well, I know that. But 1951 was a long time. Like, why are we arguing about 1951 and not maybe the few years ago?
The court decision, okay, what they did is they shot Mr. Gordon down in the argument and then wrote the decision as though the points he was making were part of the record.
Okay. Oh, I gotcha. Thank you for that.
Because it was such an expansive decision. and that's what's so amazing about it, right? How expansive it is when it didn't have to be. Anyway, that's Charles Gordon.
Okay.
Then finally, now, I'm old enough to actually have lived this stuff in real time watching this, okay? So, what was interesting to me on this was always that the government ignored the Afroyim decision in totality. They kept stripping people of their citizenship. Okay, they pretended it didn't exist. It was unbelievable, right? And it was not until 1986, 19 years later, that Congress amends the Immigration and Nationality Act to include ruling in Afroyim that you can't be automatically stripped of your citizenship, right? I mean, you just can't make this stuff up. Okay, you can't make it up. And interestingly, then it took another 5 years till the early 90s where the State Department began to take it seriously as well. So, I mean, this shows you how, this case in 1967, it didn't even really come into effect, for years later. So anyway, I mean, that's interesting, in sort of the history of this. Because, I mean, look, so I'm an expatriation lawyer, as you know, right? And, and a lot of what I do, and have done over the years is deal with this kind of ambiguity, right? In people's situations. But anyway, next, let's see, do we have anything else? Now, I think it's important, okay, to remind people what Afroyim actually means. What it means is the government cannot take your citizenship. All right. Now, the fact that that's increased dual citizenship in the U.S. tax base all over the world is a consequence of the government not being able to take your citizenship. But again, Afroyim is not a case, and I'm not aware of any case, although there may be one, that specifically rules that somehow Americans can have dual citizenship. Maybe there is, okay, but the point is that's not what Afroyim is about. That's not what Vance and Therese is about. It's certainly, obviously, not what Perez and Brownwell was about. So, there we go. Let's see. Is there anything else, or are we done?
I think we're done. All right. Well, I have a few notes that I want to get up here. So, here, and by the way, I have not looked into these too much here. There's just some general ideas. I don't want to get too much in because I have not verified these myself. But there does seem to be some common law maxims that are overturned by Afroyim. Okay. But before we get to those, I think the more important thing is the statutory interference that clash with our common law rights. And I think one that is very, very critical is actually the fourth one I have here. Enrollment Act of 1865. You lose your citizenship for draft evasion desertion. They're treating it as an implied renunciation. So that, and by the way, one of the things that why Lincoln wanted to have extraterritorial taxation and tax people overseas was that it was supposed to punish those who didn't fight in his war. That that citizenship-based taxation is a weapon. What's the purpose of the weapon? To punish people who won't fight in Abraham Lincoln's illegal wars. That's the purpose of it. That is what it is designed to do. And so now, again, that's what citizenship-based taxation is. You're going to fight for us, or we're going to tax the living snot out of you. Now we go with this. It's like not only will they tax you when you go overseas, and interesting, they make it in 1865, now you're no longer a citizen. Now I don't know if they're still collecting taxes against you, but we're seeing, and really this is the thing people need to understand where we lose everything is that people don't pay attention to the Civil War. They believe the government's story. They believe the government was right on everything. They believe the entire mythology. Well, the fact is Abraham Lincoln was one of the most detestable people ever to live. Really a nasty person who, by the way, plenty of Northerners couldn't stand him. There was plenty of newspapers who spoke out against his illegal wars and the terrible, terrible things he did. You know what Abraham Lincoln did? He imprisoned those people. He imprisoned 40,000 people. No charges, no anything, just imprisoned them because they were criticizing Abraham Lincoln. So we need to go to there. And I think that is really where we lose it. That the federal government gets way too much power, is out of control, and now can dictate. They can dictate, well, you did this, you're not fighting in a war, your citizenship goes away. You're not going to pay your taxes, your citizenship goes away. The fundamental rights of citizenship and I would say this, the nature of whatever citizenship was totally changed in the Civil War because the nature of our government totally changed. No longer was a federal government a limited power, but now it became the superpower that had more power than any of the states and could do anything it wanted. So I think that's probably where we should sort of focus on is what happened in the Civil War. And we have to remember the 14th Amendment was passed by the same people who voted for the Enrollment Act of 1865 voted for the 14th Amendment. The same people who voted for the Revenue Act of 1862 voted for the 14th Amendment. So perhaps those radical Republicans weren't these wise people who were interested in fundamental rights, but they were politicians who were trying to grab more power for themselves. So I think that's kind of where we're having to do. And now what we have is we have cases like Afroyim versus Rusk that are helpful, but they're not attacking the real problem. The real problem is that the federal government is out of control and radically changed the relationship with its own people through violence. And so I think one of these things did seem like a little bit more, okay, yeah, so this is a primary state citizen and derivative national citizenship. Pre-14th Amendment, national citizenship flowed from state allegiance, right? But now that's the change. No. Your citizenship comes from the top down. That's the big difference. And that's essentially everything of federal power. Civil War, the government got its power from coming up. After it, it's the government telling you what your rights are. So that's kind of what we have. So that's those are my points to it. But but at the same point, I agree that and kicking people out for not serving in wars is a common thing. But the other point I want to make to this is think about how disrespected our citizenship is, and think about how much our focus on the statutory interference as the basis for law gets us where we are right now, currently, with no court order, with no finding of fact by an independent tribunal, no due process. The U.S. federal government can make a naked claim that you owe $50,000 or more in federal taxes. And because of that, they could take away your passport. And that is what I would say is the moral hazard of looking to statutes to solve our problem, and also looking to 5-4 decisions to solve fundamental issues of citizenship, where one person, and as we said, this is a contrived case, this was made up, you and I can't get there, but when you're an insider, you can get your hearing for your little pet cause, but the people can't. But when you have your little pet cows, when you're president of the ACLU, oh boy, do you get your thing up there. They'll talk about you, but the rest of Americans, we can't get the access to the courts that these other people do. So that's I think that sums up to it. Let's get to something. We've got a lot of comments to get to. All right. Good morning, folks. Let's see here what we got here. Oh, I did not talk about. There's a great article. Let me get this up here. I want to talk about. It's hard to say. Parviz, I can say now. I have to say in possessive. Parviz's article here. I was just learning to say his name here. So let me get up his article, and I do have a link to it in the super chat because I think he really, I think he brings up a great. Oh, let me. I have too many screens here. Hang on. Where did it go? You see my window? I don't see. You guys aren't seeing it. Hang on. Oh, here we go. Wait, that's not it. Hang on. Let me delete this. Remove. Let me get this back up here. And there's a link to it. And I just want to let you guys know to go here. And this is really what I would say. Why can't I get this thing to show here? Why can't? All right. Sorry, guys. There is. Oh, here it is. There, finally. So here we go. Parviz wrote this, and I think it's a wonderful, wonderful expose on sort of his point of why dual citizenship is a good thing, and I agree with him. And when there was a quote in here near the bottom, I think that kind of like hit it really good. And this is, I think people want to give their kids the world. Okay, great. Americans, like all people, want their children to be safe, successful, and happy even after we're gone. To this end, people realize that future life and work opportunities for their children and grandchildren might exist in other countries. Well, look, the reason why you're writing that is because we don't have a rule of law in America. We don't have a rule of law in America. And the fact is, I get it. That hey, I need another citizenship because I can't rely on these bozos to follow the law. You can't. And I agree with you. You can't. So in a practical aspect, I get it. But here's the other thing. It's like, well, you have this other country. Well, they might do something to you. And this is the other thing to think about. That any country in the world, if they didn't want to pay attention to the fact that they could ignore it. But every country in the world is subservient to the U.S. tax code. So it's something to consider that you're getting a dual citizenship inherently that also might not be all that good either. That's the thing. It's like, yeah, all right, hey, look, it's an alternative, and you might give a hassle for them. You might create a barrier for them to come and get you, but they're going to ignore that just like they ignore the law too. So I'm not sure if it's really the protection that we need. Really, where I would rather see our protections is people say, hey, no, I'm not going anywhere, buddy. You're going to deal with me. We're going to talk about the law. And that's where I would say would be a better use of our time is to force these people who are taking away our fundamental rights to answer to us and not to get distracted by their statutes, but keep our eyes on the ball. Because I agree, the result of this absurdity is that dual citizenship is a good thing. And I think that's proof positive we have a totally illegal system. Because no way would that be what this country was founded for. Yeah, 200 years, yeah, we want people to have dual citizenship because, this country really can't be trusted with honoring, protecting our rights. That's my point on that. Now,
another thing, Anthony, to perhaps put it a slightly different way, the problem with U.S. citizenship is that the U.S. is so abusive towards its citizens, right? Of which, citizenship taxation would be, I think, Exhibit A. But it's so abusive towards its citizens. The only real possibility that an American citizen has of being, I think, free, okay, is to have a second citizenship so you can renounce U.S. citizenship.
And I agree with that. Yeah. And that's the practical result of, I think, this law that doesn't make a lot of sense. Good morning, Professor. Good morning, Professor. Bruin versus New York. I'll have to take a look at that. Robbie. All right, Rob. I'll look forward to your email. You got a letter? Looking forward to it. You guys got my email too, by the way. Let me just put it up there for anyone who doesn't have my email. If you want to reach out to me, send that. Here it is. It's right here in this banner, so you can email me there. By the way, I am working on an exclusive membership site. You guys will have access to it, so we'll have more access and can share things that aren't exactly great for YouTube and the public. So look for that. I will be getting that up shortly. So next week, I'll probably have the invite for that. Again, free access for everybody, so we can kind of talk a little bit more and have our own little private discussions. And share a lot of the information. I want to have a site for John's slides and upload a lot of things that we talk about. So look for that. But yeah, please go ahead and email that to me when you get a chance. So thanks, Rob B. And let's see here. So Rob, when the Constitution usurped the Articles of Confederation, which it did, the original treaty between the states and England for governance and debt payments. We're missing a word there. Began and this is what I would say. There is actually an older case, Shanks versus DuPont. There we go. This is kind of funny because we're talking about, this is a case that straddles the two. This is one of, I was looking at this. I didn't get into it as much as I want, but this is a very early case from 1830 that's talking about someone who died in 1782 before the Constitution. Well, that's interesting. So wait, rights existed before the Constitution? Wait a second, that's weird. So that's something as well. Yeah, Reagan. Reagan began the deindustrialization of America while pretending while pretending he was on the side. Perfect actor, really. Full faith and credit, the Sixth Amendment. All right, I think I know what you're talking about there. We're missing the fundamental. Well, I got to hear about that. 14th Amendment created fiction. Yeah, Rob B, I'm with you there as well. So you're saying Bruin disagrees with all of this. All right, Professor. We'll have to take a look at this. The 14th misstatus. If people are different than citizens. Oh, all right. Okay, so SCOTUS has told you already that citizenship is a voluntary membership that can be enjoyed at will. Today, I'm a citizen. Tomorrow, I'm just one of the people. The difference between citizenship and being one of the people. Wow, two different things. All right, I got to look in that a little bit more. Rob B. Marbury versus Madison was a total power grab. It's one of the worst written decisions of all time, written entirely in the passive voice. It's really amazing. That's really where we start our law school indoctrinations with Marbury versus Madison. And at no point does anyone mention, by the way, this case is totally contrived. Yeah, no, they actually act like it's an organic thing that was done. So that's probably a problem. Good morning to you, Sherry. I hope you're enjoying the internet is good in the mountains of wherever you may be. We'll keep that a secret. Rochelle, good morning. Is this natural citizen, state citizen, natural person versus a U.S. citizen? Oh. Yeah, all right. I'm starting to see this, guys. I think I'm trying to see what we're saying is like, look, a natural citizen is a natural person in a state. But then a U.S. citizen, well, you're a U.S. citizen who can live in a state. Interesting. What does the word may? Look, okay, all right, great. Must is mandatory. Okay, voluntary and compliance. Oh, I'm sorry, it's Lisa. I didn't mean to be shouting. I get excited. I'm sorry. Good to know. I do try to keep my passions limited. I'm sorry to get so excited. Let's see here. Yeah. Thanks, Rochelle, for defending me. Yeah. It is really I am really passionate because I see the abuse happens, and again, where John and I see this viciousness come through is in the tax regime. I mean, that's where we see this viciousness come through, and I think, Lisa, if you saw what John and I see and what this government will do to people, it gets a little much, and so that's really what a lot of this passion comes. But I do appreciate your feedback because you're just representing other people, and I don't want to turn people off from listening to us. So I do appreciate that. When the Magna Carta is, we need to bring that back. Hey, look, if the Magna Carta could constrain a king, why can't it constrain a allegedly self-appointed government, right? Why can't it do that, right? All right, so here and so I would say this, and so I think this is a great place, and we're out of time. I got to get to a whole bunch of things. I want to appreciate everyone showing up today. By the way, Keith did have to drop off earlier. He did mention that to me earlier. He did have to drop off. But this is something I think, John, maybe this is what we should conclude with because, well, great. Thanks, Anthony. You're passionate. You're angry. But what do we do? So what are we going to do about this problem of citizenship-based taxation? Because that's really our focus of so many of these things. I'm actually, I'm more of a tax attorney who sees the problems with citizenship-based taxation, and Afroyim versus Rusk really defines citizenship. So what do we do here in any relief, John? Do we have anything going on here?
Well, we have a continuation of the things that have been going on. Certainly, start with Republicans overseas continues to have a strong interest in this. Democrats abroad continues to have a strong interest in this. ACA continues to have a strong interest in it, and of course, there's the Hood bill that is, as far as I know, alive and well, and many people have a strong interest in it. I seem to have in my head that the Tax Fairness Group is doing a fundraising push right now. I think if you can get a donation in to them before tomorrow, I think there's some kind of mechanism where it will actually be doubled. So, that's a very, very small thing. Okay. But, maybe that would be something that you could do. But I think that, let me tell you how I see the real problem is that I do not think that among the group of, first of all, U.S. residents don't care about citizenship taxation. They don't even understand the difference between citizenship and residence. If a citizen is a resident, then, a citizen who lives outside the United States is still a U.S. resident. Why shouldn't they pay taxes? So, that goes nowhere. But more importantly, among the group of Americans abroad, there's a great deal of division, both in terms of whether they see this as a problem and then there's, a lot of this sort of, this group is more entitled than that group, to relief and this sort of stuff. And what I think is necessary is that Americans abroad have to come together under one voice. And the goal needs to be to extricate all of them, that they all should walk through the door to freedom together, not with carve outs, for one group or another group, et cetera, et cetera. And sooner or later, basically this whole house of cards has to come down. Maybe it's because, if the U.S. doesn't do tax reform in a big way, the country will implode anyway. Okay.
Right,
but,
yeah.
they've got to keep focused on this, and they have to understand that what has to end ultimately is that citizenship has to be completely separated from the notion of tax residency. That's my view. I don't think Americans abroad are united. It's such a complex problem. I don't think they understand it. I think the key point is stay the course. Sooner or later, there will be change. That said, I think for the group that's probably 50 plus, if you don't want to live with this, I would get out of this immediately.
And then you take your own steps, and you could fight the good cause while not being a U.S. citizen. There's always things that you could do. And actually, Avery, your question actually gives us a great opportunity to tease next week's podcast, because Keith suggested this. That what we want to do is get kind of everyone the big tent. We want to bring everyone together because we are seeing people divide into their little camps, and divided is exactly what the government wants. And so next week's podcast will be about uniting the various factions, people who don't see eye to eye on things, to say, hey, look, this is what we need to do, and here's how all of us will benefit if we unite. And so I think that's the thing. We're going to be discussing that last year. Oh, yeah. Okay. Got it, Avery. Yeah, I got it, Avery. I see your follow-up. Just the other groups and bills. So I think that next week, we'll try to sort of we'll try to organize, okay, who are all the factions? Okay, what can all factions agree to? And then from there, move forward. I don't know about any of the, at this point, Avery, we don't really have a functioning government. So I don't know what to say about the groups and bills. We don't have a Congress isn't even in session, and who knows when we'll get back in there. But I think one thing we can do is unite. So we're going to be discussing about that, getting some themes together. I do see Parviza. Thank you for getting up early, my friend. I really appreciate your article, and this is what I would say is that you've heard me disagree that dual citizenship is an oxymoron. Okay, and I'll stick by that. I'm going to stand by it. But I'm not saying not to do it. Because it's essentially this. It's like, look, the government puts us in an emergency situation where it won't protect law, where it will go after us. So should you do something logically inconsistent to protect yourself? Well, I don't see why not. So I agree that, it's helpful. But the fact is, it shouldn't be, right? I think maybe that's my point. I thanks, Avery. Thanks so much for that. I want to thank everybody. Oh, wait, we have something about teenagers here. If you haven't, I would encourage them to listen to these chats. Oh boy, well, I do have two teenage boys, and it is funny what they've picked up from me. Oh my God. I gotta say, they hear me, and I listen to them, and it is powerful. And I do say that that's really what this is about, Jerry. It's the next generation. What do we want to leave them with? What do we want to leave them with? And that's really what drives me, and I think a lot of my passion, why I get out of control, because I want them not to have the burdens and the confusion and the lack of opportunities. And that's really what's happened, is that it's very different for kids in their 20s. There is no real meaningful opportunities now, and it's been many years of great. Yeah. Oh well, and then finally, all right, we're gonna do this, David. I love this comment. This is great. We're gonna have to end here out of time, but there you go. And I think this is a perfect example, David. So you're very well stated, right? I believe dual citizenship is a wrong thing, but in a post-Civil War citizenship is such degraded value. Thank you. Why should we want to be compelled to have exclusive loyalty to it? I think that's well stated, David.
It has very little to do with loyalty. It's simply a circumstance of birth for the vast majority of humanity. That's what it is. And and the bottom line is that for purely arbitrary reasons, where you were born, to a very large extent, it determines the opportunities that one has in life, right? I mean, there's a professor, wrote a book, I think he called it Citizenship Apartheid. Make no mistake about it, citizenship matters, okay? And it matters hugely. And I believe that U.S. citizenship does need to be protected, okay? However, the problem is that the United States, as far as I can see, and I'd be interested in other perspectives on this, but as far as I can see, the United States is the only government that, basically works to degrade and devalue its own citizenship. It's unbelievable that they could be this stupid. Well, they can't be that stupid. So the only answer is that they're completely unaware. And, to go back to, one of the earlier questions, I think that perhaps a campaign generally of how much the United States government is destroying the value of U.S. citizenship, I think might be an interesting way to discuss this problem, right? This is not a question of.
I am going to try to make that part of the presentation next week, and along with I see Andrew is really focusing on the we the people versus the citizens. So I'm going to try to get some. I'm going to talk to you about that, Andrew. And I'm going to try to include that in next week's podcast. The difference with that, along with showing how degraded it has become, and intentionally.
Really terrible, Anthony. I mean, think of it that there are people who will pay significant amounts of money to not be American. I mean, not everybody, but a lot will. And that is an extraordinary thing, that a government can have become so abusive towards its citizens. Or I shouldn't even say have become. I mean, for those who heard the presentation today, the abuse of citizens has been basically a feature of the U.S. government through the whole history of the United States, right?
Yeah.
Read Professor Frost's book on this. And in fact, invite her onto the channel, Anthony. Again, I don't know, or I'm not out trying to, shill her book or anything, but she has a marvelous gift for converting technical concepts, into everyday language so people can understand them. And I think if people understood the extent to which, the U.S. government has, degraded the value of citizenship or weaponized it, if you will, right? Over the years. I mean, I think it'd be an eye opener for a lot of people.
Absolutely. Well, I'm looking forward to next week. I want to thank everyone's here, and of course, Professor. Oh wait, hold on a second. He added something here, and this is something that I want to get to next week. The word citizen is not in the Bill of Rights. That is true. So what does that mean? Well, I'm hoping to find out. Andrew, I'll be talking to you. Help me out. All right. Well, for that, I want to thank Keith for joining us earlier. I want to thank the great John Richardson. And yeah, if you just can't deal with it, you need to get out. Reach out to John. Renounce. And I would just say, if you are looking, if you do need some help, international estate planning or some inheritance coming in the U.S., you can reach out to me. We help out there. And oftentimes, a lot of our clients need to get into the Streamline program so they can take it in inheritance from the U.S. That's actually a big reason why people are coming to us for Streamline disclosures and kind of getting into compliance, is because they're having some reasons why. So it's either one way. It's like, I think it's one way or another, John. It's like either you got to come to compliance or renounce. It seems like, that I think the time to be in the middle ground might be
There's one group where that is not the case, interestingly, right? And that's this, this accidental American group who've never been in the U.S. tax system. Yeah. Basically unknown. I mean, if they do want to renounce, they've got the dual citizenship birth exemption, interestingly, right?
No,
or
right.
Very often the relief procedures. But what's extraordinary about the situation is that because they've never been in the U.S. tax system, and many of them don't even have a Social Security number, they actually have the benefit of being a U.S. citizen without any of the obligations, right? I mean, they're sort of
they're the best citizens.
Well, I mean, that's the gold standard, right? That's the gold standard, if you will. Now, I do appreciate that, like all American citizens, they have problems, okay, with access to banking and things like that. But I mean, that's just part of what it means to be an American citizen in the 21st century, right? They have that problem. But, I mean, imagine, this is just to your point of people either have to come into compliance or renounce. Not necessarily true. It depends on what category, what category you are, right?
All right. Well, good point. All right. Well, thanks, John. Thanks, Keith. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. We'll see you next week, and I think we'll be on Thursday, same time. So see you all then. Thanks again.